So in this video, we're going to be talking about one of the most important control structures in any programming language, and that's functions. So functions are blocks of code that can be defined and then called at a later time, or in some cases defined and called at the same time. Now there's a few different types of functions or different ways of writing functions in JavaScript that I want to show you. So we're going to look at function declarations, function expressions, also something called an IFI, which is an immediately invocable function expression, and also property methods. Alright, so let's start off with function declarations. Alright, and if you have any experience with any programming language, you've probably seen something like this before. So basically we'll say function, and then we'll name it. I'll call it greet. We put some parentheses, and then we have our curly braces. Alright, so anything inside here is the function scope. So let's say we just want this function to log out a string of hello. So if I save this, nothing happens down here. We're not seeing the actual console log because all we've done is declare the function. Okay, so we actually have to call it by writing the name and then putting some parentheses here. So if we save that, now we'll get the console log of hello. Now, this isn't something that you would do too often unless it's purposely for logging. Usually you'd return something from a function, so I'm going to comment this out, and then we're just going to return the string hello. Okay, now if I save this, notice that the log has gone away because all we're doing is returning it. We're not actually saying we want to log it to the console. So if we do want to log it, what we would do is wrap the actual function call in the console log. Alright, so now we get hello. Now with functions, with declarations, expressions, all types of functions, they can take in parameters, also called arguments. So let's say we want a parameter of name. Alright, actually let's do first name. So down here what we could do is pass in a value, let's say John. Okay, and that'll be the value for this first name. Now we could do whatever we want with it. Let's say we just want to attach it to this hello, so we'll just concatenate first name and save, and then we get hello John. Alright, now you can have multiple parameters, so if I wanted to put a comma here and say last name, and then down here just concatenate a space and say last name, and then we could just pass in another parameter by putting a comma, and we'll say Doe. Alright, so now we get hello John Doe. Now what if we were to take away these strings here, not pass anything in, and save? So we get hello undefined undefined, because that's what these are right now, is undefined. So there is a couple ways to have default values for your parameters. Back in ES5, or I shouldn't say back in ES5, we still do use ES5, but before ES6, what we would have to do is something like this. We would do if type of first name is equal to a string of undefined, because that's what it is. Then we would define it by saying first name equals and then John. Alright, and then we'd have to do this for every parameter that we want a default for. So let's say last name. And then we'll set that to Doe. Okay, so now if I go ahead and save, we get hello John Doe, even though we didn't pass anything in, because that's the default now. If we were to pass something in, like let's say Steve Smith, that's going to overwrite the default. Alright, now this is kind of a pain in the neck to do, and it doesn't look very good. So what we can do now with ES6, let's comment that out, but what we can do now is we can just define the defaults here. So we can say equals John equals Doe. Okay, and now if we were to, well, first of all, if we were to keep Steve Smith, that's going to work, but if we don't have any parameters in here and save, we'll still get hello John Doe. Alright, so this is a much better way than doing something like this. Okay, so that's the basics of function declarations or statements. So what I'm going to do is comment out the console log, and now we're going to take a look at function expressions. Alright, now a function expression is basically putting a function as a variable assignment. So for instance, if we were to do const square and set it to a function, all right, now it can be named or not, or it can be anonymous. Okay, usually they're anonymous. If you have an expression like this, you have a named variable and an anonymous function, but you could do function square. You could name it like that. Okay, now we want to put a semicolon here because this is basically a variable, and then in here let's pass in a parameter of x, and we'll say return x times x, like that. All right, and then if we want to use this, we'll go ahead and do a console log, and we'll say square, and let's pass in 8 and save, and we get 64. All right, and just like with declarations, if you wanted a default, you could do that. So if we say 3 is the default, okay, 8 is obviously going to be 64, but if I were to pass in nothing now and save, we'll get 9 because it's treating 3 as the default. Now, in a lot of cases, or I would say most cases, using an expression or a declaration isn't going to make much of a difference. But there are times when expressions have some benefits to them when it comes to hoisting, when it comes to closures, and some more advanced stuff that we're not really going to look at now. The purpose of this entire section is to give you the basics and the core fundamentals, and I don't want to make it too difficult right off the bat, so we will work our way up and get into some more complicated things later. Alright, so comment that out, and now what I want to talk about is immediately invocable function expressions. Alright, and these are also called ifs. So basically what an iffy is it's a function that you declare and run at the same time. Alright, so to do this, we need it to be an expression, and we can make it an expression by putting it into parentheses. Alright, so we just simply define an anonymous function inside of parentheses. So I'm just going to do a console log here, and we'll just say iffy ran, and save. Now notice that nothing happened down here because this is not complete. When we run functions, they end with parentheses, okay, whether it's a declaration or an expression. So we actually have to add some parentheses right here, okay, which may look a little funny, but that's how these are constructed. So now if we save, we get iffy ran. All right, and these can also take in parameters. So if I were to copy this and comment it out, let's pass in, we'll say name, and we'll console log, we'll say hello name, and then we could just pass something in here like Brad and save, and then we get hello Brad, and it just runs right away. Okay, we declared it and it ran at the same time. Now these are actually very useful when it comes to certain design patterns, like the module pattern. We're actually going to have a pretty big project later on, which will be a calorie counter application, and we're going to use the module pattern. It's basically a bunch of ifs that have private methods and private properties, and it's one of my favorite design patterns, and it's based on this. Alright, so we will get more into this later on. For now, I'm just going to comment that out. Alright, so we are going to get into more object-oriented programming later, and I know I did already kind of show you this when we went over object literals, but we can put functions inside of objects as well, as opposed to just in the global scope. So let's say property methods. Now, when a function is put inside of an object, it's called a method. So what I'm going to do here is create a variable of to do. All right, we're going to set it to an object like that, and then let's say we want an add function. So we could say add, set that to a function, and have it do something. In this case, I'm just going to log add to do. obviously you would have it do something here, something else. And then we could go down here and we could call it by saying to do dot add, like that. If we save, and now you can see we get add to do. Alright, if we wanted to put an edit, we could put a comma here. We could say edit function. Now an edit would usually take in some kind of ID, so you know what to do your editing. So we'll pass in, this will take in an ID, and then we'll just console.log. I'll throw a template string in here, and we'll say edit to do ID. Alright, and then we'll go down here, we'll say to do dot edit, and we'll pass in 22 and save, and we get edit to do 22. Alright, now you can also define functions for this object outside of this. So we could say to do dot delete equals function. Okay, just like any other defining any other function expression. And we could say console.log delete to do, and then go down here and say to do dot delete, and that will run. Alright, so I just figured I'd throw that in there just to show you guys there's different ways that we can do things, different patterns, and we're going to go over the the popular JavaScript design patterns later on in this course. Alright, so that's it, guys. In the next video we're going to take a look at loops and iteration.